All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Sasha. I'm here on the Huddlecast with Junseth. Today is August 23rd, and we're going to talk a little bit about mining, a little bit about the SEC, and a little bit about blockchain with physical goods, as well as the Cody Wilson situation.
Nice.
So super excited to have Junseth on.
Sorry for your fans.
No,
so
I
is
think
this going to be recorded audio, or are we like showing my beautiful face?
Oh yeah, your beautiful face will be on YouTube.
That's super unfortunate. Hello, everybody.
Hi. Junseth, can you give them a little, when I say them, it's like 20 people, but can you give all 20 of them a little background of yourself, how you got started in Bitcoin, how long you've been around, and what keeps you motivated to stay on the forefront of it?
Sure. I don't know if I'm on the forefront, but I got into Bitcoin about a month after the pizza, and I thought I was an anarchist at the time. Really thought that it would be a good idea to overthrow the state, and thought that all government was evil, et cetera, et cetera. And then I started a little show called Bitcoin Uncensored, and we grew to become a wildly popular Bitcoin podcast. Every Bitcoiner in the world listened. I think all like 1,000 of them. And now I have my own little show called Junseth's World, which is a little show. It's not that big anymore, but which is fun. I'm actually very content with our small audience because that's what I want. I want to be known among a very small group of people.
Well, the people that do follow it really like it, myself included.
I'm glad. It's entertaining for me to make. I hope it's entertaining for you to listen to. If it's not, then you can go and fuck yourself.
Entertaining and educational.
Oh, good.
So one of the things you talk about a lot on your show is mining, and everyone that I meet that gets into Bitcoin, it seems, not everyone, but a lot of people, when they first hear about it, want to become a miner. And yeah, I know a few have, and then their mine coins got hacked, or it's just there's a big cost to get into it. And I was wondering if you could give us a quick, overview of how mining works. Like,
sure.
Yeah.
So I am not the most technical Bitcoiner you'll meet. So I tend to speak in abstractions that give everyone sort of a 10,000 foot overview of things so that anyone can understand it, because that's kind of how I understand Bitcoin. So mining is the process of basically solving a puzzle. The first person in the world to solve it then gets what's called a block reward, and a block reward is some coins, right? So basically, if you had like 10 people in a room and you had them all doing a Rubik's Cube, then the first one who solves it would get some candy or something like that. That would be sort of like how mining works. It's called an asymmetric problem. So just like a Rubik's Cube, it's really difficult to do, but it's really easy to verify that it's done correctly, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what mining is. It's the computer equivalent of a Rubik's Cube. It's really simple to verify.
That is the best way I've heard anyone explain it. I'm going to use that from now on.
You just don't talk to that many people. That's the problem. So it's just that it's very easy to verify, and it's very difficult to do. But
wait a minute. Now, when I used to solve Rubik's cubes, I would move the
solve
stickers.
A Rubik's Cube?
I moved all the stickers. Everyone thought I was really good at them. So
Sasha, that's not really solving the Rubik's Cube. But like, if you do that, then I suppose that everyone would have to agree that you solved it. I know people that can solve it in less than a minute, and you probably were slower than them, right? So what you were doing was a sort of surreptitious sort of mining, I suppose, right? So, but yeah, like that's what mining is. It's just it's an asymmetric problem, very difficult to solve, very easy to verify that it's solved. And what's cool about it is that it scales. It gets harder as more people are trying to solve it, and easier as less people are trying to solve it, such that it takes about 10 minutes to solve every time, globally, everyone in the whole world. It's a really cool problem.
And how many people are mining around the world, do you think?
Oh, God, I have no idea. That's a difficult question because, you have big mining. I mean, like individuals or computers themselves. What do you mean?
Computers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know either answer, but yeah, the thing is, there's a shit ton, and as it's difficult to know because every ASIC out there, the only evidence you really have of how many of these things are attached to the network is the hash rate, and ASICs do different amounts of hashing depending on their age, I guess. Like current ASICs are a lot better at hashing than old ASICs. And, there's people trying probably to GPU mine. And I bet that there's even a few people trying to familiarize themselves with mining that are using their home computer. They're never going to win anything. But they're going to, solve a few, or they're going to submit a few hashes, and well, not submit, but they're going to hash a few times. And the network will know that hash rate exists, but they're not going to solve anything for the win. It's like finding a Monopoly piece at this point. The boardwalk Monopoly piece if you're going to win. It's so difficult for anybody to win a block.
So then, if it's that hard, what's the motivation for other people to join? Why not just have one person doing it? Well,
well, I mean, like. The motivation is to get paid, right? What's beautiful about mining is that when everyone gets paid over time relative to the amount of money they're putting into the network. So if you spend $1,000 or $5,000 worth of energy on the network looking for a block, eventually your expected return is going to be about what you spent. So, and some people think that they have an advantage, like Jihan Wu, has tons of ASICs. He's mining out, with Bitmain, big old mining operation. And, last year we found out that they had sort of found a flaw in SHA-256, which is the algorithm used for mining, such that they were able to gain a significant advantage over other miners. So, it's like football. You have to be, these are the people that are the best energy burners in the way that like the NFL is the best players of football. These guys have that they have figured out how to burn the most energy better than anybody else. And they can make a profit. Some of them can, others can't, as you've so eloquently put with your friends. Most people suck at it. Most people suck at it. Just like if they were to go into the NFL today without the training and without being, genetically predisposed to being good at football, they would have a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm. And how much, what's the block reward right now?
I think it's 12.5 Bitcoins per block one. And here's the other thing you got to, like, there's the beautiful thing about it is because you have these sort of, these difficulties in winning, people can do things like combine their hash rate, right? So I can contribute my hash rate to a mining pool, presuming that the pool remains a good actor, and they will distribute any money that they and everyone else who's mining with me wins according to the hash rate that you produce for the pool, right? With the presumption that those wins are based on the number of attempts that the pool itself is putting forth, which can be from anybody. It's kind of amazing. Bitcoin's awesome.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think about so if there's 12.5 Bitcoins for every block that's mined, there's been a lot of argument about increasing the block size. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I think, a lot of people talk about increasing the block size. I think my big frustration with the block size debate is that it has become synonymous. People have made block size increases synonymous with what we're saying is scaling. I wrote sort of a joke parody song a while ago called "Scaling Solutions." It's based on the Rainbow Connection song, if you ever heard that. And it's for this reason. Like, I don't think that scaling has much to do with raising the block size. Scaling in computer programming tends to be sort of the idea that you build a program so that it is sufficiently able to handle the volume that it currently needs to handle, and maybe is slightly over-engineered to handle an increase in users coming to the platform. So Bitcoin is scaled to its volume at the moment. There's plenty of people who can use it. Everybody can use it. It just means that you have to have there's maybe a backlog of transactions at times. And the beautiful thing about the fee market in Bitcoin is that you can pay to have your transactions verified now, or you can pay to have them put into blocks later. And I don't mean put into blocks later necessarily, but you can say that I'm willing to go to the back of the line because this is a $1 coffee transaction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what about, so some of the cons of, changing the block size or making it bigger is that miners would get less fees too, and that might not, create the same incentive. Do you think that's a good argument, or, it could stop people from spamming the network? Or
well, I tend to believe in market efficiency, so I think a lot of it would even out, right? So I think I personally in a commoditized market, when you have, do you know what a commoditized market is? So basically a market where everybody is doing the same work. You can't do anything to maybe sell your services in a way that is differentiable, right? So for example, in Bitcoin mining, you can be an evil villain, you can murder children, you can be a rapist, and if you're mining, you will get 12.5 Bitcoins if you solve the puzzle, right? Doesn't matter who you are. You can have a company that explicitly states that it is funding child trafficking, and if you win if you solve the block, you get the reward. It's a remarkably strange phenomenon. It's as commoditized service. The block hashing, the creation of the blocks, all of that is such a remarkably commoditized service. In economics, what ought to happen is that in a market that is perfectly commoditized, you should see profits start to trend towards zero. And I think it's a little bit, and Luke Dash Jr. says this too, it's a bit of a flaw in the system to have a market where mining is highly profitable for some actors. It's a strange flaw in the system. I think that will eventually disappear. And I think that if you have big blocks or small blocks and minor fees or no minor fees, I think that pretty much would work itself out, given the fee, or given the market. Also, like, these miners don't depend on fees. These fees ought to be at the moment still a small part of the reward. I think that the time that you're going to really care about fees is as all of the Bitcoins are mined. But when you're closer to like 2140, depending on the price of Bitcoin, maybe not. Maybe a tenth of a Bitcoin at that time will be worth like $4 million. But who knows? I think that the goal of the fee market is essentially to subsidize, or right now the goal of getting Bitcoins, winning Bitcoins in a block, is to subsidize the fact that there is no, essentially blocks are open. And the only reason that you really do see a fee market that has developed is because, there were a lot of people that were composing transactions poorly. There were, Coinbase, for example, wasn't doing as many transactions. They weren't sending them out in bundled transactions like they could have. There were a lot of other companies that weren't doing that. So you can compose transactions in such a way that you reduce your fees. That's an excellent way to reduce fees. And in addition to that, I think I don't know that there's pure evidence of it, but I think that we were suffering a spam attack, and I don't think that big blocks necessarily are going to solve that either, because if a miner, for example, is spamming the network, they have an expected return. They think that they're going to actually get some of their fees back, right? Because they're going to win some of the awards, the block awards. And if you open blocks up and make them bigger, that math doesn't actually change. You still have the same expected return on how many blocks that you win. I think a mathematician probably could actually tell you whether that's actually true, but that I believe would actually be the case, is that if you had bigger blocks and someone wanted to spam it, all that would happen is that they would increase the possibility of going bankrupt before they win the next block. But luckiness in the mining sector, in terms of like winning blocks, is pretty standard. If you have a big enough chunk of the hash rate, 15%, 20%, whatever it is, you're going to win blocks at a rate of about 15% or 20%. So you can actually do the math on how much actually you're spending on doing things like spamming the network.
Okay. So when you say that, though, it doesn't sound like it's a terrible idea to do mining pools, but I know a lot of people talk about them as if there's no way to profit off a mining pool.
Well, there's no way to profit off of mining if you're doing it, and like, I mean, it's difficult. It's really hard. why? What do you mean profit off of mining pools? Like for the operators of the mining pool, or for the people mining?
Yeah, or like get any money back. The way I've heard people talk about it, like it's a complete waste. You end up spending way more than you get back. And
well, that should be obvious. That should be obvious to anybody, because I mean, if mining in fact does trend towards $0 in terms of your profitability, you know what that means very simply is that if you're entering a mining pool, you're giving away money to somebody who's operating that pool. They're going to take a small percentage, right? They're going to take a cut, and every fee that you impose is going to make it difficult for you to compete against people that don't have those fees. So you have someone like Jihan Wu who's mining on his own. He doesn't have to pay the fees of a mining pool operation unless, you know, he's got his miners in those pools as well, which he probably does. But you're going to get as if you're Jihan Wu, you're gonna get to keep that money that others would have otherwise spent in mining pools. So yeah, of course, mining pools are going to make it less profitable. Mining is a very thin margin business. I think when people get into it, they think that they're printing money, but what they don't realize is that they're competing with every other single person in the world trying to print money as well. And it's an interesting thing to think that you could enter a market that you know nothing about and do better than the thousands and thousands of people who've been there for years and years. It's very arrogant.
Yeah. And I have a friend that has been going back and forth to Colombia, and he was saying that there's a lot of people are taking to mining in vehicles, like they'll put their rig in a bus or something, and drive around, and they'll be like rolling blackouts, and they're all thinking that it's because so many people are Bitcoin mining.
That could be true. In a lot of these countries, I mean, I think those are actually brownouts, right? The rolling blackouts.
Yeah.
I mean, Bitcoin will grow to the level of the fish bowl it's in, right? It's a goldfish. So if you have these subsidies, if you have subsidized energy in your country, Bitcoin's going to take that entire subsidy and just eat it. You know, it's really a subsidy, you know, muncher, if you will. And that's what's amazing about Bitcoin, is that if you make it profitable to mine, people are going to mine. And the other thing is that a lot of these countries where, you know, Venezuela, for example, where the people are scared of losing their money, they're actually willing often to take a loss on the mining because it's more secure to hold their Bitcoin. If you think about the risk of holding the actual cash, they're far more willing to take a loss on the mining. So, I mean, again, that's another thing to consider, is that if you're getting into mining, you're competing with people that are actually willing to lose money because they gain money by losing it insofar as they avoid the inflation in their country. They're subject then to the volatility of Bitcoin, which is enormous and ridiculous, but they're so much more willing to be subject to that volatility than high inflation.
Mm-hmm. And if Bitcoin does go up in the future, you know, their investment today might pay off even more tomorrow, even if they're doing it at a loss right now.
Well, that's the hope, but you never know. Like I think that you have to acknowledge that, you know, we've been very lucky over the last few years. There's no reason Bitcoin has to work or that it had to work. I think that, you know, in my world, I would say that we've been very blessed to have Bitcoin work the way in which it's worked. I think it's been a remarkable sort of technology, and I can't believe that it's gotten this far. I think that I'm very lucky to have witnessed the rise of Bitcoin in you know, as soon as I did. I think that most people who come here, particularly new people, lack the awareness of where we've been. And I think that's pretty cool. I think it's cool to know where we've been, because Bitcoin started as this humble, small, little organism that nobody really gave two shits about, except stupid people like me. And then it grew, and now the whole world is paying attention to this thing, and they're trying to figure out what the fuck it is. But they're coming with an immense amount of arrogance, right? So they're coming here and they're looking at it and they're saying, I now have been here a week, I'm an expert. And, you know, you see this report, it was by Deloitte or something like that, that says that 60% of oil executives consider themselves an expert. There's some, I was reading on Twitter about that. I didn't actually look at the report yet. Apparently.
Yeah, I saw it too. It was actually, I think the people that were in oil said they weren't as much experts as people that were like bankers or other.
Good.
It was, yeah.
But that's, I mean, I think that my interpretation, my reading of it, having read that headline, is per the conversation on Twitter, perhaps misanthropic. But there is, in fact, an immense amount of hubris by people that just got here. And it's amazing because you know what? Bitcoin has grown so much. The technology is incredibly complicated. I do my best to boil it down so that I can understand it because I'm stupid. And I know that everyone else coming here too is stupid. And it's going to be very difficult to show up and tell me that you're a smarty pants and that you understand what Bitcoin is.
Yeah.
Without having spent significant time here.
Mm-hmm. I know exactly what you mean because I've been trying to learn, I've been spending a lot of time researching this stuff for the last little while, but I still feel like I know nothing. And the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know about it.
Well, I myself still ask the question, what the hell is Bitcoin? And I think what's cool about it is that over the years, it's allowed me to ask questions like, what is money? Right? What is money? What is a commodity? What's the difference between a commodity and Bitcoin? What's the difference between a stock and a dollar? Right? Like, why can't I pay for a hamburger with my S&P shares? These are all questions that I think are very, very interesting. And I think that the average person doesn't even know that they can ask, or if they did ask them, their heads would explode. I think that there's just a lot of lack of knowledge out there on these sorts of things. Like what makes an asset class an asset class? Why do we have different names to categorize these things? Because essentially they all look like beaver skins in the end, don't they?
Yeah.
Right. So like if they all look like beaver skins, why don't we call this barter? And the reasons are actually very interesting, but they're not as apparent as you think. They're not just very obvious. And when you get here, the thing you think is, I so smart, I going to tell you what this is. And, people come here and I hear it all the time. People say that like, anarchists are the ones who like Bitcoin. And you know what? There are a lot of anarchists in Bitcoin, but there are a lot of other people here too that are finding interesting uses for it. Cross-border payments are a really weird use case. A lot of remittance type applications are amazing and are highly usable in Bitcoin. Like you could actually send money to places like Somalia, which are barred from receiving remittances. And, is that a good thing? I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but I think it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not sending money to people who can't get it right now.
But you might be funding terrorism. There might be a good reason that the United States has banned remittances to Somalia, right? Like you just don't know. Like it's a difficult thing. I think that the government has a really difficult job in trying to manage the interests of those here in the United States with the interests of poor people in the world or poor people here in the U.S. Or just generally. Like I think it's very difficult for them to manage those interests. I see it, and I think it's amazing. Amazing the scale of job that they have. And I don't do a lot of attempting to judge those sorts of decisions because I just don't know what goes into them. I don't know what the national security concerns are. I don't have a great understanding of diplomacy and the difficulty of state action and whatnot. I don't have enough hubris, I hope, to think that I understand why the government does what the government does. Now, I also hope that I have enough self-awareness to sort of watch the government and remain vigilant about things that I think are important, right? Like our First Amendment rights or something like that. I don't give wholesale authority to the government, but I do think that that the government needs to be given some breadth to do things. And I think that's what's cool about Bitcoin is that it allows us it sort of puts a constraint on government that allows us as individuals to give the government breadth, but also to have an interesting sort of option in case the government acts badly. And a good example of this is, I think that with remittance companies, in particular Western Union and Uniteller and whatnot, they tend to be very afraid that they're going to lose their bank accounts, right? Mm-hmm. Gambling companies, offshore gambling, they tend to be extremely scared of the fact that the United States is attempted again and again and again to make it difficult for them to receive bets. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But you know what? With Bitcoin, the government no longer has an option, has the option to regulate that stuff. Now they can accept Bitcoin, and there's nothing that anybody can do to stand between you and them, except maybe the government can show up at your house and arrest you. But I think that's pretty cool that that the government has now some areas where it's a little bit more difficult to regulate. And I think that we need to understand in this world, like that that's a very different world than we used to live in with regard to some of these things. People used to send money overseas with Western Union or Uniteller, and they could get them into these offshore books. And it was always a little bit of a difficult process. But they could do it using, and the government kind of pulled the rug out from under Western Union and Uniteller, and they made it much more difficult to send money that way. Mm-hmm. But with Bitcoin, you can.
You can, but there's still a challenge with it because you can't buy a lot with Bitcoin now. So if you're sending a remittance somewhere, that's great. You can get the Bitcoin to them, but what can they do with the Bitcoin if there's someone that needs food and they can't buy food?
But that's not true at all, because you can buy plenty with Bitcoin. And you can literally buy dollars with Bitcoins, right? That's what local Bitcoins is all about.
Okay, yeah.
You can buy dollars.
Bank account.
If you have a thing for which people will accept dollars, or for which people will accept Bitcoin in exchange for the dollars or the local currency, you have a thing that allows you to buy anything. Ripple calls their thing a bridge currency, which maybe that's what Bitcoin is. Maybe Bitcoin's a bridge currency. I don't know. But people accept it for their local currencies because they understand that Bitcoin has value. And that literally is what a store of value is that people can grab it and they can exchange it for the thing that they can use to spend money. Now, is it a good store of value? Maybe it's not as good as gold or something like that, but it can be used as a store. It does have that function to be used as a store of value. And I think that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And certainly anyone that's used it as a store of value over the last couple of years, I'm sure they're glad to have had it. Maybe not if they bought it, a few months ago, but
what's cool about it is that if you do use it as a store of value, there's a lot of people now who want it. It was it's a lot different today than it was. I was going to say 50 years ago.
Yeah, Bitcoin sure is different in the last 50 years.
5 years, 5 years has changed a lot.
Yeah.
You can go anywhere in the world and you can find local exchangers. That wasn't the case 6 years ago. Wasn't 6-7 years ago. It just wasn't.
Mm-hmm. But don't those local exchangers have to worry about all the regulations around money services?
Yes, absolutely they do. And that's the thing. Local exchangers are doing that at their own risk. So there's a weird sort of movement going on among people that local exchangers some of them are flouting the law. Some of them are cooperating with the law. And it's a weird sort of gray market that's sort of cropped up among this little group of people who care about Bitcoin. And you as a Bitcoiner can sort of choose the level of state involvement you want in your life. You can go with Coinbase and you can hand over your IDs. And, or you could be like Tone Vase and only buy your coins from a, person-to-person transaction. There's other people who use the Bitcoin ATMs for which they have to provide KYC. Some of them provide stolen IDs. It just depends. You get to choose your own risk. And that's what's beautiful about Bitcoin is that it's sort of like a risk lever. You get to choose how much risk you're willing to take. And exchangers get to take a lot of risk. Mm-hmm. Hodlers, and by the way, that's why exchangers get compensated quite a bit because they're taking on a lot of risk. And when you look at these markets, when you look at how much people are compensated in them, the hope would be that the people taking the most risk get compensated the most because they have the most risk of losing as well. Which means that they're within the price of their services, you're going to see things like the chance of going to jail for 20 years calculated in. Mm-hmm. That's the hope. That's it. That's the dream.
The dream. You'd have to pay a pretty big premium to do it that way. But I guess that's
drug dealers. Drug dealers take that sort of premium all the time, right? You're also wondering what the risk itself is. Like how likely are you to get caught? How likely are you to go get prosecuted? What is the punishment? What do you lose if you're prosecuted? I think that those are all really interesting questions, and I think it's amazing because, libertarians like to talk about the free market. I don't think what they realize is that the cost of governance of these markets is included in the price. I think it's really cool that markets get to act as sort of a wrapper around everything, and that wrapper includes the price of the risk the government may put out there in exchange for compliance, right? So, for example, if you're the government and you say that you get 20 years if you sell a bag of cocaine, then guess what? Cocaine goes up in price because it becomes riskier to sell.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of cops out there trying to bait people into doing these transactions, at least in America, through the local Bitcoins or things like that. You have to be really careful who you're selling it to, or if they want to register as a money service business, but then you have to report every transaction. So it's but I don't think they have that rule around the world equally. So probably in some countries, I think the ATMs don't have any KYC on it. So you could go to Mexico, do transactions there, and then you have it in. As long as just getting your cash into Bitcoin is the hard part, I guess, and getting it out if you need to. But there are ways.
Well, certainly, right? Like, I mean, every country has different regulations, and the goal of every country is to make regulations such that people can be prosperous, hopefully. I mean, I think that's the case in the United States, is that that's the goal of regulations. Now, the government makes a lot of mistakes, right? A lot of governments do. And oftentimes, you know, I will say governments compete, because you have governments competing with each other for making regulations such that they can become more prosperous. And so far, the United States has done a pretty damn good job of making laws that allow us to be prosperous. I think there's a lot of libertarians and anarchists who disagree, but I think that they've done a pretty good job. And I think that there are areas that can be improved, and that, you know, maybe we need to fight for the improvement of. But I think that we've done a pretty decent job of that. And money's a really weird thing. Money, you know, if you look at the history of money, the people that have been handling it have always been viewed as sort of these disgusting, disease-ish, you know, virus, gross people. And you look in the early days, you know, where you'd have to leave your area if you wanted to go get a loan. And you'd have to go into, like, I think it was in the Netherlands even, they you know, they sort of ghettoized these like Jewish populations in order to basically make those the areas where you went to go get financing. Because, you know, financing has been such an amazing part of the modern world. Everyone recognized from a very early stage that we needed the ability to have loans, to make and take money in a way that allowed us to sort of, you know, leverage our ability to use money, right? Like, the mortgage itself has evolved over the last 100 years such that almost every single person in America can take one out and afford a home if they have to. Mm-hmm. And that's amazing. I mean, early day bankers, I mean, they were handling money. It was dirty. It was gross. So nowadays, you know, you have this sort of evolution of, you know, in finance, where Bitcoin, which a lot of people do regard as money, is sort of this other thing that, you know, people again are sort of regarded as dirty for handling. I find that remarkable. I think it's pretty cool. And I admire the people that are willing to take the risk of venturing into sort of new financial territory. I admire it. I think that it's incredible. I also think that it's fucking scary, and I wouldn't do it.
What do you mean you wouldn't do it? You wouldn't own it? Or?
I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be a local Bitcoin exchanger if you kicked my ass. Like, I think that it's scary and dangerous. And I like I said, I admire the people willing to do it. I think people that take big risks, doing things that there's not a lot of law about. I mean, you're a lawyer, you get it. There's not a lot of law about this. We don't know exactly what the laws are, and they're semi-applied retroactively in some ways, right? Like, we don't, you know, they use existing laws, and in fact, you know, people that are, you know, that are convicted of certain things are in fact probably guilty of violating them. But we don't know what Bitcoin is. Like I said earlier, I'm always asking the question, what is Bitcoin? So it becomes very difficult, particularly when you have 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds dealing with this thing. They don't know what the laws are. They didn't think that they were going to get caught with like a money laundering charge because they did something like gave money to somebody who then took the Bitcoins and used it on Silk Road, or, you know, put them under duress, like in the case of Mitchell Espinosa down here, where they basically said that they were mobsters and that they were going to use this money to buy stolen credit cards. And you know, I think that he, you know, I think it's reasonable. I don't know what he actually would say, but I think it's reasonable too in that scenario, feel a little bit scared and compelled. Like you have to then go through with the transaction and get the fuck out of there. I think that would be very difficult. I think that's a duress type situation. And that's the position that these money exchangers, if you will, are putting themselves in. I don't want to do that, but I admire those who are willing to.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. Those
But
are
in the end of with that Espinoza case, I kind of like how the judge came out and said that it was his own property, so he couldn't get charged with whatever he had charged.
I don't know the state of the case now, but they escalated it to the state. So like it's not it was I think it was.
I think it got decided that I think it got appealed. Like he didn't do great at the trial, or like it didn't go in his favor at the lower court, and then it got appealed. And the Court of Appeals said, well, "I'm not going to put this person in jail for selling his own property to someone else." And I think they also looked at the cops kind of were entrapping him a little bit, like
absolutely. But so, I have to look at I don't know where what the state of the case is right now, but I do know, I think it was the lower courts actually that ruled in his favor. The state,
and then now it's being appealed.
The state appealed the decision. So, I find those people to be the pioneers. I think that those are the people that like deserve the most respect and admiration here, because they're the ones that are charting, they're using their own bodies, if you will, to chart new law. They're the ones that are putting themselves at danger and at risk in order to make sure that, Bitcoin becomes a thing. And I think that's remarkable. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Without people out there making exchanges for it, it never, if that pizza transaction had never happened, where would we ever have established a price or
right? But
off like this?
I don't even know that Laszlo's the one I would be like admiring for taking risk, right? Like he just bought pizza. I don't know that would be like this. I at the time, I guess, when it was done, I remember back in the day when I was a child, when in Bitcoin's early days, I remember questions being asked, like, is it even legal to hold this thing? Mm-hmm. So like those questions I think have been answered at this point, but I do think that there is the weird sort of legal questions of like, how do you exchange it? Who gets to exchange it? Do you have to have a money license? Money service license? Do you have to be a money service business? Like what is it? Is it do people that handle this have to do the same things that a remittance company would have to do in terms of licensing? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Well, I do think that there's people trying to act like they know. Mm-hmm. And I think the people that are doing it the safest ways, a good example down here, I think Bitstop has been doing as like a full service, like money type, they have all the licensing in place. They've done as much compliance as they can. Full disclosure, I invested in that company. But like, I do think that they are trying to do it in a way that is the safest way. Right. And I think that may be the wrong way. It may be the right way. I think it's cool regardless. Mm-hmm. I like to watch. I've always been a spectator here, always, and that was, that's my show too. I'm just a spectator. I go through the news, I look at it, and we talk about it. That's why I don't really care how many people listen. I never have, because like it's just a show where we talk about what's going on. It's the same conversation I'd be having with friends, regardless of the show or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think? So we have the next halving coming up in 2020, and I've heard so many different price predictions around that. Do you think it's going to cause the price to go up a lot? Like if you look back at the other halvings, we saw the $1,000 and then the 10,000.
So you didn't. All of that's a lie. Here's the thing about halving. Everyone will tell you that the halvings make the price go up, and they have all of, these chartalists are just retarded, and it's not the case. Like, you look at the first halving, the price didn't move. You look at the second halving, the price didn't move. A number of months later, maybe 6 to 8 months, the price started going up. I think halvings pretty much get priced in, and I don't know what makes the price go up. Maybe it's some sort of supply restriction on the coins. Maybe miners have some sort of 6-month, dissolvement of their coins at a certain rate in order to not tank the markets. I don't know. So maybe the markets do get restricted for some reason that I don't really understand. That could very well be the case. But for the most part, it seems like the price just kind of stays the same after the halving. And if you don't believe me, go look at the actual price. Tell everyone who tells you that the price shot up after the halvings to shut up and go actually look at when the halving happened, and then go look at the price. They just didn't move.
So what do you think made it move so fast in the fall last year?
I think a monkey took a shit in a tree and a farmer decided to buy 400,000 Bitcoins because that was the sign that he needed to get in. I don't know. I mean, like, no one knows. That's the thing about these prices. No one fucking knows what moves them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really weird to speculate. I watch Tone sometimes, and Tone speculates. I just think speculation on the price is just so stupid. It's so dumb and boring. I don't give two shits what the price is going to be tomorrow. It just doesn't matter. I think this is cool tech.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there's ever going to be a world, people talk about the price will be determined everything in Bitcoin, like we'll be using this as the main world currency, or do you think it's just going to stay as something kind of on the fringe?
Who knows? I don't think that, I mean, I think commodity money is a pretty bad idea for the most part. So, I mean, I think that it's a little like, I think that there have been these experiments with commodity money like gold. Gold money was attempted. There were a lot of problems with it. But a lot of the problems have to do with the fact that there's just not that much of it, right? So you can't actually represent the world's value with gold because there's not enough gold to represent the world's value. Bitcoin's a little different because it's spaceless and it's divisible to a huge amount. Like, I always used to joke about gold. But like, what are you going to do under the gold standard? You're going to take your little gold coin and then shave it off at the grocery counter until you've like reached enough weight. They're going to have these little like scales, scales of justice, and they're going to like sit there and tell you when you've paid enough for your groceries and gold dust. Like, that's just a stupid world. The thing about Bitcoin is that you can pay it in divisible ways. So like, I think that's cool. I think
it's a risk. Sorry, I got to grab my charger. I meant to plug my computer in, but it's such a big risk too to pay for your groceries in Bitcoin, because what if, a year from now you're paying double on what you could have been paying, you know what I mean? Sorry, I'll be right back.
I'll just show the people my penis. Well, she's gone. So I guess it's just you and me, ladies and gentlemen. Have any questions? No questions. All right. All right. What do you guys think about the art behind Sasha's little setup here is interesting. I like that she has a Pepe. I like that she has this weird, like, petrified wood thing. I heard a conspiracy today that was amazing. There's a lot of people who actually think that mountains are tree stumps. Go to YouTube, Google it. Mountains are tree stumps. It was a conspiracy. I like conspiracies. I go down these conspiracy rabbit holes a lot where I'll start looking at things. My two favorites right now are that one. I've been watching a lot of content on that and this QAnon stuff. Really, really like listening to that conspiracy. But okay, where were we, Sasha? What were we talking about?
I think, maybe we could get into the conspiracy stuff, but I think the last thing I said was it's a risk to pay for your groceries in Bitcoin now, because who knows what the heck it's going to be valued a year from now.
Well, the humor of Bitcoin is that I hear a lot of people tell me that it's a deflationary currency, and I think that people don't know what inflation is. Inflation generally, when you talk about it, and like libertarians in particular, and I have a seething hatred of libertarians. Not really, but I mean, I just get very, like, I think their arguments are so tired and dumb. Like, here's the thing. When libertarians talk about inflation, they talk about value deterioration, right?
Like, I used to be able to buy a bag of chips for 5 cents.
But they never talk about bags of chips. They talk about, like, the value of the dollar. 100 years ago, it was, we've lost 99% of our value in the last 100 years. I'm like, okay, great. And okay, sure. Okay, so if we're going to talk about inflation as the loss of value, that's fine. Now, today, they talk about it as printing money. So, like, libertarians will, like, sort of bounce between these sort of definitions of inflation. One is the quantity of money going up, which is a kind of inflation. It's inflation of the money supply. And one is the value of the money that you have going down, which is an inflation, money going down is not necessarily caused by inflation of money supply. That can be a factor, but that's sort of what we talk about generally when we're talking about inflation. So with a libertarian, I generally try to like figure out which one they're talking about, and they'll waffle between them, based on whatever's convenient for the argument. But generally, when you talk about inflation, you're talking about loss of value. And Bitcoin is not a deflationary currency in the way that people talk about it being. Because you know what? There are times in Bitcoin where it drops 50% in a month. That's fucking inflation. You don't want that. It's very difficult to operate on Bitcoin as an economy. And as people will regularly say that Bitcoin would level out and become cheaper and have less volatility the more people that are in it. Maybe that's true. It's actually not true with gold. It's not really true with like these commodities. I don't see why Bitcoin has to. I think that Bitcoin probably will have a lot of seasonal volatility. I think that like if people are going to use it for gambling, it's going to be weirdly volatile during like the Super Bowl and maybe college football during like March Madness. Like, you know, I could see things like that. I could see like weird seasonal volatility in the way that gold has seasonal volatility while India's
and the stock market has it too. Like it's just random things like the January effect. It always goes up in January or Monday.
I don't think that's true anymore, by the way. I think that most effects that are discovered in the stock market disappear the instant that they're articulated. And that's what's, you know, a lot of those things are discovered by Renaissance Capital, which is this giant hedge fund which runs these huge algorithms and basically finds these weird anomalies. A number of things that I think that they found, one of them was that you could look at UPS earnings reports before the other companies had released their earnings reports, and UPS was a bellwether for obvious reasons, right? Because you could look at the whole retail sector and you could know whether this year was going to be an up year or down year based on whether UPS was shipping more or less packages. That was something that once discovered, it was, you know, that efficiency got eaten up. The instant that UPS earnings reports comes out, the entire retail industry sort of just like adjusts. So the instant those things are known, what happens in the market is that the advantage of the ability to take advantage of that usually gets gobbled up pretty quick. So, you know, but I do think that there will be weird seasonal volatility with Bitcoin. I think that that's a strong possibility because it's just supply and demand. There are times when Bitcoin is going to be more useful for something and times when it's going to be less useful. During the times that like maybe a government is experiencing hyperinflation, you know, I've heard in Venezuela that there's like actually a premium on purchasing Bitcoin in the streets. It actually costs a little bit more. It might actually, maybe less. I think it's more, but like it might be less. Regardless, the local price of Bitcoins in Venezuela is a different price than like we see on the exchanges.
And I wonder, are they allowed to use it? I have a couple clients that are from Venezuela, and they are mining, and they said they can't mine there. Like there's a big problem with the government if you're found to be mining.
Well, the government actually confiscates your miners in Venezuela right now, and I have heard from a number of people that there's a lot of suspicion that the government itself is actually mining. I've heard actually that the government confiscates miners and then often will call the miner to ask them how to set up the miners so that they can. So I think that there's actually a big story that if somebody wants to go get it in Venezuela, it's there. I think the government is probably stealing its own energy from the people to mine Bitcoins and altcoins, whatever it is, so that they, I always joke about keeping Bitcoins in your sock drawer. Bitcoins are on a private key. Someone's got to have that private key. So I don't know who this is ingratiating, but someone's sock drawer has that private key. Now, the reason that a lot of Venezuelans have done is they've actually switched from mining Bitcoin to sort of other cryptos, and the reason they've done that is because they can get GPUs into the country, but they can't get ASICs because ASICs were known what they look like, and GPUs have a more general purpose, right? So you have a video game that you want to play, you need a GPU. So a lot of Venezuelans started like importing GPUs by the tons. I don't know if that's something that you can still get in Venezuela. But I don't know what they're using, maybe script or something like that to these mining to mine down there. But there's a lot of people who are mining or were at least mining using GPUs and basically joining these mining pools. And I don't know if they're exchanging these other currencies for Bitcoin. A lot of the people that I've heard are actually saying that they're keeping their money in they's cryptos that they're mining.
Okay. And also when we go to talk about, everyone says one of the big benefits of Bitcoin is that it's got this limited supply, but do you think by adding all these other coins in, that completely takes away the benefit of the limited supply?
That depends on how you think the world will look in 10 to 15 years. Now, I'm often accused of being a Bitcoin maximalist. And I don't mind being categorized that way. I don't think that there's a lot of use for multiple coins. I think that maybe as experimental grounds, a lot of these coins have tried things, but honestly, I haven't seen I think there's been maybe one or two things that have been merged from altcoins, but for the most part, these altcoins are just giant busts. They're just absolutely stupid projects that are largely built on communities of ideologies. So like, the question that you got to ask is what happens once those ideologies kind of disappear or those memes find themselves waning, right? So in Ethereum's case, this notion of it being the world's computer seems to be one that I think that a lot of people are starting to question when they realize that the cost of doing computation on Ethereum is, I don't know how much more, maybe 100,000 times more expensive than doing it on your home computer or on an AWS server. All of a sudden, you have a lot of questions that need to be asked about the efficacy of this chain and the efficacy of this project. So most of these projects have sort of similar problems. I think I've articulated Dash's problems, in my opinion, largely that they give about 40% or 50%, whatever it is, of their security away, which is the block reward, to people operating nodes, right? And I think that leaves their blockchain very vulnerable. So I don't know what the world looks like in the future, but I do think that I do think that what's going to slowly happen is I think that a lot of these projects will slowly die. I used to think that the explosion, a supernova would occur, and these chains would kind of explode in beautiful fireworks. I think at this point, I think what I believe is that these communities die slowly. You know, they die one at a time. And I think a good example of that is the Shakers. If you look at the history of religion in the United States, in Rochester, New York, there was this like giant uprising of religion in the 1800s, out of which you get things like Mormonism. And another group that came out of it was called the Shakers. And if you know anything about the Shakers, they would stand in these circles. They thought that they were sort of an apocalyptic cult. They believed very strongly that they were sort of the last group on earth. They were called by God, and they all lived together in a commune, in common, right? On Shaker communes. I don't know how many communes there were. Maybe there was only one, but they would divide the house.
Did they have like one leader, charismatic person that started it all, or where did it come out of?
Yeah. Yes, and they divided the house between men and women, men on one side, women on the other. No sex allowed, and they were very, very pious. Extremely pious. And what happened is that movement lasted for a while. They gained new followers, and the last followers joined, I don't know when, probably like 1940s maybe. And I don't know what the current status is, but I think it is like 2000. I think the last remaining Shakers were like 97, 98 years old. So I think that's how a community dies. And I don't know that we need 100 years to watch these things die, but I do think that what's going to happen is they will slowly watch their adherents kind of disappear. And maybe you end up with altcoins in sort of pockets where people say that they're the last users of Dash or something like that, or the last vestige of Ethereum. But I look at a lot of these things. If blockchains are merely like computer programming languages, then what you're going to see is a lot of these early languages sort of disappear in the way that like you see a lot less people using, I don't know, I don't really know anything about computers, but like Perl? It's just something like you see a lot less people using a lot of these old languages, and they sort of languish. They exist. They're there for people to pick up and use. Sometimes they get picked up because they have like a weird use that people like, or maybe they persist because banks still use them or something like that. So there's like a very specific interest for them. But I don't think that these altcoins are going to have like a long life. And I don't know that like Bitcoin's the only one that survives. Maybe there's one or two. But I look at Bitcoin and I look at what I think will happen, and in my personal belief, probabilistically, Bitcoin is probably going to be sort of the last survivor in a giant fight. That said, maybe none of them will survive. You never know.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as the main difference between Bitcoin and all the others? Is it because Bitcoin's anonymous and the censorship resistant side?
I don't know that it's. I don't know that I would call it anonymous per se. I don't know that I would say that it's perfectly censorship resistant per se. I do think it has a lot of those features that make it very compelling. What I think about Bitcoin, like I said earlier, about it being a sort of lever for participation in government, KYC and whatnot. I think it's also it's a lever. I think you can lever it for how anonymous do you want to be. I think you can be anonymous as you want to be on Bitcoin. I think you can use it. I think that basically, Bitcoin gives you the ability to use it in as censorship resistant way as you want. it's not censorship resistant. For example, if you're sending it from Coinbase, they can stop those transactions. But it is censorship resistant if you're sending it from your own personal ledger, or Ledger Nano or something like that. I think until the FBI seizes your ledger, then it's their coins. But it's as censorship resistant as you want it to be, and it's as anonymous as you want it to be, or as anonymous as you're willing to want it to be. Like if you're willing to do it like tons of OPSEC, it's pretty anonymous. Mm-hmm. Why do I think it's going to survive? I think that Bitcoin is the only coin where people are actually taking strong consideration as to how to build it. I think the other coins tend to be sort of ideology coins where the developers are trying to placate to a specific group of people. I think that there's this notion that like marketing grows coins quickly, and I think that that's true. And I think that there's a lot of precedent for marketing being a great vehicle for getting people on board something. But I think that what people don't realize about marketing is that marketing only works as long as it's funded and is being marketed. Marketing is like a car. You can go for as long as you want, but you're going to have to keep putting gas in the tank. And that's how marketing works. Marketing requires more and more burn. It's the same as proof of work, essentially. So as long as these coins are marketing themselves, I think that they'll probably, maintain some semblance of a community. The instant that they stop marketing themselves or don't have an interested public or a public that is interested in marketing them, they'll die. Passion can only last so long. Mm-hmm. You see that with these coins, by the way, as they sink, you see a lot of these communities kind of shrinking.
Yeah, even the Ethereum people, I'm kind of wondering, like, as the price goes down, is there enthusiasm of Ethereum being, this great thing, maybe better than Bitcoin, easier to develop on? Are they changing their tune as the profits are evaporating?
Right. I mean, I could tell you, like, the ICO market kind of dried up, and that was the thing driving Ethereum. I've thought a lot about the ICO market too, and like, I think that a lot of people think that the ICO market's going to like disrupt, I don't know, fucking the stock market or something. I don't think that it's going to do that. I don't think that that's what the ICO market will do. I don't think that's what T0 will do. I think that most of these things will revert eventually. Like maybe T0 does this whole decentralized play and they call themselves a blockchain. I think they will just revert to becoming a competitor to NASDAQ or the NYSE. And they're not going to be that special. It's going to be the same type of tech because they're going to find out blockchains are slow and suck. And so what they're going to do is they're going to build a database. It's probably going to resemble very much what the New York Stock Exchange looks like. And if they use Bitcoin or any of these sort of blockchain techs, it's going to be tangential to their sort of original purpose. I do think that ICOs have one area that they're going to disrupt. You want to hear it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Uber disrupted the taxi token industry, right? So now taxi tokens are worth almost nothing, or they're going down in value just rapidly. Mm-hmm. I think that ICOs have a decent shot of disrupting the shell corporation market.
How so?
So right now, if you want to do a pink sheet, what you have to do is you have to do one of two things. Either you have to go through all of the compliance restrictions and become a shell corporation yourself, right? And the beautiful thing about doing that is that you get a clean company. You are a shell corporation that's new. You kind of get to make it whatever you want. Well,
do you have to be a shell corporation to be a pink sheet, though? Can't you just be a small corporation?
I believe you have to register. You don't have to buy a shell, but you basically you have to be compliant, which makes you a shell, right? Well, it makes you a shell if you go belly up. Your corporation will be sort of like an empty shell.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So
sorry, my understanding of a shell is like, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I thought it's when you buy another corporation. So say the other corporation already has a lot going on in it, but then they're no longer operating or profitable, or they're another company has this as an entity to like provide a distance for their taxes or for liability purposes, but it's not like a fully running company.
Right. So a shell corporation generally, with regard to pink sheets, is like an empty corporation. It doesn't really have much activity going on. It probably at one time did, but maybe they went bankrupt or, whatever the case, right? So they're sort of no longer acting as a going concern. Mm-hmm. All right. So what you can do if you want to take your company public is you can buy one of these things. They go anywhere from $50,000 up to, I don't know, $500,000, depending on how clean they are. Mm-hmm. All right.
And it saves you the money of to get listed on the stock market requires a huge effort and legal fees. So that's the benefit of getting one of these things.
Right. The benefit is the compliance benefit, right? You don't have to spend $1 million or $2 million having a lawyer do the paperwork. You might be able to buy a shell for $50,000. And then the benefit of having a shell, the benefit of being a pink sheet generally is that you can basically print money. Sound familiar? Just like these ICOs, you can basically print money that is separate from US dollars. You can say, oh, I want to have a website and I want it hosted. And the hosting company will say, what are you going to pay us with? You're going to say, I'm going to pay half of my hosting in cash and half of it I'm going to give you shares. And the goal, and the hosting company will accept that because their goal is to get rich on your stock. Now, pink sheets never really work out. But what they do have is they have these shell corporations. There are the occasional companies that grow from a shell corporation into like a corporation listed on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ that have like maybe a price that is that allows them to be like listed there, or credible enough, et cetera. So like there's all sorts of things that people try with these shells, and there's an entire industry of actually brokers of shells, and they will sell these shell corporations. Now, I could very well see the ICO market eating that up. And that's the only place that I see it disrupting. I think they will revert to pink sheets. All of the regulation that we need for ICOs is already in place in the US. It's the same regulations that we have for pink sheet stocks.
Mm-hmm. Which is just following all the securities laws. But the ICOs seem to be going more, so to get to be on a pink sheet, you have to have a couple years of financials and like basically, I mean, if it's already listed, you don't need this, but to get listed, you have to get SEC approval to get on one of these. But if you sell via Regulation D, you don't need any approval, but you have to limit it to accredited investors. And
well, you're noticing that a lot of these ICOs, the ones that are realizing that they're a security are starting to do Reg D filings, aren't they?
But there's not, from what I'm seeing anyway, there's not a big market of accredited investors looking to buy these things. So it's kind of interesting. Like they go this route, but then they're not selling.
That's because accredited investors are begging. Okay, look, I mean, the reason that we have regulations around pink sheets is because pink sheets are for the most part scams. Mm-hmm. And, the reason that you have regulations the way you do is because we've done this before. People showed up they want to buy scams. Everybody wants to buy scams because scams always come with one promise, and it's the promise of like,
get rich quick.
Pure rich. What's that? I couldn't hear you for a second.
I couldn't hear you either. I said it was to get rich quick. What did you say?
Yeah, what I said is pure riches with no effort. So like, it's the same thing, right? Like that's the thing. Like all of these scams. That's why people do these MLMs. That's why people gave their money to OneCoin. That's why BitConnect was given so much money. That's why all of these things are so easy to fund. These scams have like people want to get scammed. I see it in Bitcoin all the time. Someone will literally stand up and say, I mean, look at BitConnect. People stand up and they say, we are selling you a Ponzi scheme. And people are like, okay, where do I sign up? And they send their money right away. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's because they don't understand that they're giving their money to a Ponzi scheme, right? But literally, the person will stand up, describe to you the format of what they're doing, and if you sit there and listen closely, you say, okay, so you're taking investor money that was previously invested, and you're promising me dividends, but you have no product. So where does that dividend money come from? It comes from previous investor money. You're like, yeah, but like eventually what will happen is we'll have a product, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, okay, but you're giving me dividends on like day 7. So like, where's that money coming from? That's a Ponzi scheme.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
That's like 90% of the ICO market. I feel like is that these people are like doing these like box, refrigerator box time machines, and they're running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme, but like, or some kind of scam like it. But the thing is this: there's no fiduciary obligation for a lot of these guys. So like, if there's no fiduciary obligation, I am trying to figure out what the actual scam that they're going to be hit for is, and I think it will probably be the fact that there is in fact a fiduciary obligation because these are just securities. They're just pink sheet stocks. And they're being issued without approval from the SEC and without the need to go through that old process. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see SEC need to sort of change in the way that we have like 3-day settlement, and banks are starting to sort of modify that because of the threat of like Bitcoin and whatnot. I think that the SEC is going to probably allow a little bit of freedom when it comes to, you know, these companies listing. And the other thing is that since Netscape, we've had this weird issue with companies. And Netscape went public before they were profitable. And now that's becoming commoner and commoner practice. Companies that are not profitable are going public. And I would be very, very surprised if the SEC didn't allow Pink Sheets to kind of share a similar sort of privilege. And I could very well see them allowing Pink Sheets to go to go public, if you will, sooner and sooner and sooner in their life cycle. I didn't actually know that they required a couple of years of being a going concern. Is that actually the case? Because as I see it, I see people going and doing Pink Sheets all the time that literally just bought or that just started yesterday. I suppose it's because they're buying shells.
Yeah, I think they must be buying other companies and using their records. But I know for Regulation A, which is like doing a mini IPO, you have to give the 2 years of financials to get that. So that kind of limits like these ICOs because they don't have any history, but they can still do Regulation D or the regulation crowdfunding.
I am like deeply offended by the space in terms of these ICOs. I think that like I am severely disappointed in the people that are taking advantage of people in this space. You know, like I see like Bancor and the VCs that got involved with that. And I am amazed at the stupidity that is being allowed to be uttered from stages with people like Andreessen Horowitz and A16Z and such. I guess I believed in a world where those guys had some scruples, and I look at what's going on there now, and I'm just kind of like, oh, they're just fine with this. It's utter complicity. It's a weird issue, and I don't understand it. And I also think that like, I also think that there is it's to me very, very scary that I think that those are the guys that will get away with all of this. These ICOs that are being released that will never provide value and that obviously would not have provided value, but were being promoted by like people that are considered reputable venture capitalists who were basically releasing these because they knew that they could kind of double dip. I think they could do the ICO while retaining their entire fiscal interest in the company, all of their equity, no dilution. And I think that's a big, strange reality that nobody has ever sort of considered as a possibility. Because I don't think that anyone thought people were going to be so stupid as to give their money for nothing.
Yeah, I think what happened was people didn't understand that with a token they don't get anything. Like it matters nothing what the company does after they buy the token. You know, there's no link there, and I think that's where the general public thought they were getting some. You know, it just looks like a stock. You think you're getting, if the company's going to do well, you're going to see some profit through your token, but that, you know, that's what's missing.
I'm making a lot of fun predictions here, but I think that what we're going to find is that really the only useful thing for these tokens is as cards. I think Pepe proved that. I think that we will see card games perhaps come out of this. I think that we'll see.
Dan made a card game out of Bitcoin. Did you see it? It's like a memory game.
Bitcoin is a good example. I think basically all that you'll find is that these assets are useful for is cards, and tokens that represent cards. I think baseball cards could be issued on the blockchain if people wanted it to be. I think you see
What about a physical card? Does it have to be a digital card, or can you have a physical card on the blockchain?
I think Cassatius Coins proves that you can have a physical card that exists on the blockchain.
Cassatius Coins, those are the ones that have a QR code printed in them?
Yeah.
Okay, so you could do that with all art.
Sure, why not?
What about, could you put a QR code in a house?
Sure, it's inelegant. I mean, I think that's inelegant, but I think I see the world moving to like a supremely digital place where like you have people holding cards on their phone, and like I don't know why you would need a physical card if you got it on your phone and can actually sell it and deliver it and not also have it. Like the thing that's remarkable about Bitcoin is that when you send a coin or when you send like a counterparty token, for example, which counterparty is like an accounts-based system. When you send a counterparty asset or a Bitcoin asset, it's no longer yours. What other digital thing do you have that you can send off and not have also?
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's the remarkable miracle of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. And so you kind of walk me through that with with any kind of physical good. So some people argue that the whole blockchain thing will be a better database for like MLS or anything. It'll show real time what's happening with the real estate market. And then when you were explaining it to me, you said, well, what happens if someone steals my house steals my, like, hacks the token that's associated to the house? Does that mean my house is gone? No, like, there's always this separation between physical and the blockchain thing. And that made sense to me. And then for putting all the real estate stuff onto the blockchain, then you still have human error issues where, someone could put the wrong house associated to the wrong token, or it's not a perfect system. But I think that
well, I'm always amazed that lawyers get duped in this space, because I mean, like, Sasha, have you actually argued in court, or have you, like, taken a case to its logical conclusion?
I haven't gone to court yet.
Okay, so the inanity of things that you argue on the way to court are hilarious, right? Like, you have to argue whether things really happened when they happened. How do you know that this is when it happened? Well, the date's on the paper. Do you have a witness to testify to that? No. Okay, well then how do I know that you didn't just write the date on the paper? Okay, I guess I'll have to find a witness, and we'll have to depose that witness, and we're gonna have to, like, to me, it's so funny to think that something like houses could go on the blockchain and that would be an efficiency. Because, like, why not put houses on, like, why not have a Google Docs record of your house? Like, I like, it's just so dumb. MLS is a fine system. Maybe it needs improvement. I don't know. But I would think that the improvement would come from a company saying, like, we have a better system here for you to, pull this real-time data from our system. And I see something like a Zillow. Zillow could update their records instantly, I bet. I bet they just don't, because, they don't wanna.
A lot of them are kept at local offices on pieces of paper. So that's where the title, like the history of the title, can come into question if they've sold the same house twice.
How does blockchain solve that?
Well, that's the thing. I don't think you kind of introduced me to the idea.
Why are those titles kept in a folder on paper? And the answer is real simple. Why do you think they're held on paper rather than?
That's how we always did it.
But why do you think they haven't gone digital yet?
Because there's a risk. Well, one, it's going to be very expensive to move. Like, you're going to have to go through every house in America and put it onto the digital system, and you can make mistakes when doing that. So it could be. An inefficient system.
Could it also be that someone's really lazy and just doesn't want to, like, find the time to do that?
Well, yeah, yeah.
Does blockchain remove any of those human coordination issues?
No.
The idea is that the blockchain shows up and does the work for you. Like, that's what people seem to believe, that the blockchain is going to show up and do the human coordination, but it doesn't. If you want blockchain, if you want records, if you want property records into a digital format, you still have to do the work of getting them into a digital format. The blockchain doesn't show up at your office and go, like, I'm here, I'm the blockchain, and then, like, scan them all for you. That's not how it works. There's human coordination that's still involved.
And so, what, Junseth, can you tell me this? At risk of sounding really silly here, how does the blockchain?
That's the goal of my show, is to sound as dumb as possible.
But okay, how does it work to put the records on the blockchain? Like, is it really a database? Like, as I would enter that record, it's going to stay there. Like, could I put a photo on it, or like representing the house? How does
you can do anything you want?
Like, how much can it store? I guess is
as much as you want.
So
that's the beautiful thing about a blockchain.
Okay, and each blockchain, they can build it differently for whatever specific.
You can do whatever you want. But, like, let's say you want a secure blockchain, right? That seems to be the goal here for, like, a records sort of program, right? Mm-hmm. You want to use Bitcoin, all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to use Bitcoin to store a record. Okay, so what do you want to put on there? So you want what, the actual data that you need on, like, an actual record, right? So, like, let's say we scan all the records and we want to put these PDFs on Bitcoin. How big is the PDF?
I don't know.
How big do you think? Let's say it's a small PDF.
Like couple megs.
Okay, how big? How many
100
megabytes?
megs.
100 megabytes?
Yeah.
Okay, how big is the block size?
1 megabyte.
How many blocks would you have to 100% fill up to put one 100 megabyte PDF on the Bitcoin blockchain?
1,000? 100,000?
No. It'd be for 100 megabytes. If you filled up 100% every single block, you need 100 blocks.
Okay, yeah.
How much would you have to pay for that?
I don't know, a lot. Like
millions.
Yeah.
You would have to pay so much money.
How much for each block?
Right, and that's how much it costs to store the data on Bitcoin, just to get it on there. Now you have to like talk about the cost of like all the nodes that are going to have to store your data, all of that stuff, because there's ongoing costs with blockchains like Bitcoin, with these secure chains like Bitcoin. Like if you want to upload the PDFs, that's the cost of it. Millions of dollars at 100 megabytes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was my guess of 100 megabytes way off, though. How much? Like, what would a reasonable?
Well, you said let's call it 5 megabytes. You'd have to take the entirety of 5 blocks, 5 entire blocks. You would have to take up. How much do you think it would cost you to convince a miner to let you take up an entire block? Every other person who has submitted something to that transaction cannot be in that block either. Like it says a submitted transaction that time cannot have any data in that block. It's all you. How much you got to pay? Because it's probably like $300.
Yeah,
it could be more.
Now, what about something like?
I think that like how much it costs per like kilobyte is actually somewhat exponential. It might be a $20,000 block that you have to buy to take up the entire thing.
Now, then how does counterparty work? Because isn't it on top of each block? And same with Ravens using the Bitcoin blockchain. They're saying that they move assets on the blockchain. So how?
Yeah. So with counterparty, have you ever tried to move a counterparty token without any Bitcoin in the wallet?
No.
You can't. Bitcoin is the grease to counterparty's engine. So like it is, in fact, you need a little Bitcoin, a little dust, which is literally a miner's fee, in order to insert data into the blockchain. All right. And you insert that data for a fee. So, and one of the cool things about counterparty is it lets you do a thing called broadcasting. So you can actually broadcast messages to the chain literally exactly the same way. You pay a little fee and it will put the message on. I put I think it was the first chapter of Genesis on the blockchain a long time ago just to see what it would cost. It was like $7.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I wonder how much it cost when
the text.
David got married. And when
David got married, I don't think that ever got onto the blockchain, but it was probably pretty cheap because they probably like David didn't actually get married. Were you there for that? Yeah. I was there for that.
I was giving out the cake.
Were you?
And I worked for the ATM company at the time that was
interesting.
But I
actually have no idea.
I don't know if it made it right on.
I have no idea if it actually made it onto the blockchain. That's what I think. I think that's really funny. It's also just an absolutely stupid exercise to write things onto the blockchain like that. I mean, the equivalent to writing something on the blockchain, like I am marrying Sasha, is like just write it on a goddamn tree trunk. Go carve your name in a redwood. And like, why not, like, while you're at it, climb the tree and do it like 100 feet in the air so that no one ever gets to it and no one can ever see it. That's the equivalent. You have to, like, blockchains are like, they're these really stupidly complicated data structures. And you have these databases that are actually attached to the blockchain so that we can find things in the blockchain because of how stupidly complicated it is. It's a little bit like storing money on the beach. And if you went to the beach and you were like, this is my wallet, you take a bunch of quarters and you throw them out onto the beach, you don't know where those quarters are. So you're going to have to take little flags and put them into the beach so that you can know exactly where those quarters live. And that's a little bit like a blockchain. It's just it's amorphous, giant data structure that's very hard to find things in. And so what do we do to find things in is we basically have these like sort of pointer systems that allow us to know exactly where things are, such as your money in your wallet. The only way to, like, it's a huge list of giant list of outputs. These little coins, fractions of coins in every single place. And figuring out where they are is highly inefficient. It's very difficult. They're stupid. They're really stupid data structures. Like, if you're not trying to do like something that's censorship resistant, why would you use it? It's for storing data. Like, banks that think this is a good idea, like, holy shit, you're dumb. You don't know what this thing is.
But aren't they building like different kind of blockchains where it's cheaper or faster? They might be giving up some of the security, but they're not using.
And what's the point?
Like,
yeah. if you're building in a system that requires no security or doesn't require you to like have zero trust among the participants, then you can build a fucking database and you can give everybody certain kinds of admin controls. You can give Bank of America the ability to do this, and Wells Fargo the ability to do this. And then if you want to further govern it, you can petition the government to make laws regarding the removal or addition of data to that database. It's not difficult. It's an absurd idea that you would need anything like a blockchain in a world where like you trust all of the participants. Or any of the participants, well, not any, but like if you are building a structure where you trust the participants, why would you want a blockchain? Why? Why not just use like a database? We have plenty of databases that allow you to share data among participants and allow you to code sort of user involvement. What's it fucking called? When you have authority levels in your system. You can do that on a lot of these. It's not difficult. You don't need a blockchain. All they're doing is reverting to database. They're announcing incredible features that they're adding to blockchain, but they're not adding them to blockchain. They're just taking a traditional database and calling that a blockchain and saying that they've added this feature to blockchain. There's no reason to add them to blockchain. You don't need those features. You have them in database.
I think there's a big reason, and that's marketing.
I think so. I think that IBM is pretty guilty of that. I think there was this great little presentation done by a Harvard professor this week from it's the Dig In series. The premise of his lecture is that blockchains suck and that they're not good for much. And then he goes on to say that but we're making great improvements. And then he gives examples of like the IBM blockchain. And I'm like, dude, really, you're so close. He was so close, yet so far.
Yeah.
So far.
Okay, well, let's it's already 10:30. Can I get your take on the Cody Wilson stuff before we end?
Sure. What do you think of the Cody Wilson stuff?
Okay, well, I'm not I've been listening, so I guess to preface it, I really liked your last couple episodes where you talked a lot about how important content is and how important it is to keep it free. And I hadn't thought that hard about these issues until the last couple weeks. And then with the Cody Wilson thing, I'm from Canada. I'm not a huge gun fan. Like, I think the Second Amendment might have been misinterpreted over the years from what it was meant to be originally. But I'm a big fan of the First Amendment, and so I think if they did censor, him putting those prints for the 3D guns out there, it would really be bad for the overall freedom of the internet. So,
okay.
I also although I don't think everyone needs guns, I don't see the harm in having them, because I could just as easily kill someone with a frying pan or my car, or, if I wanted to do harm.
Well, I would acknowledge it's not just as easy to kill someone with a frying pan as it is with them. I mean, I appreciate that perspective. I mean, like, in Canada, you appreciate a wonderful freedom of speech, don't you?
Yeah.
Or is that not?
We have a good freedom of speech. I think so. Yeah.
Do you have freedom of speech in Canada? Because I don't think that you guys actually have that codified.
I I did my law school here, so I don't know whether or not we do have it codified. I probably should know that, but I've never once encountered a situation where speech was censored in Canada, that I remember anyway. I know we certainly pay a lot of taxes. That's the big, problem with the Canadian government. Well, one of, I guess, but
Doesn't Canada have like hate speech laws?
Have what?
Hate speech laws?
Speech? I feel really silly, but I don't know what our laws are around speech at all.
I think that what you'll find is that freedom of speech is a uniquely American right. I think that it's a God-given right. I think that it's a right that you can come to through like an application of strong Western understandings. I think that all of that is true. I think that I love it. I think that I love freedom of speech. And I do recognize that it's uniquely American. I am baffled by other countries not having it, because it is something that we have here and is something that we abuse to no end, because it's wonderful, and it's our right to abuse it. I think that's all excellent. I have a lot of misgivings about the notion of its existence without the Second Amendment. I don't know that you can have the First Amendment without the right to have weaponry. I don't know. I might be wrong. But I strongly suspect that once guns are, if you remove the right to weaponry and the right to have guns, the right to bear arms, I think that you very quickly will see the removal of speech rights. I think that's just inevitable. That coming, I mean, I have
why do the two have to go hand in hand? Because can't they just say,
because freedom of speech is the most offensive right that you can give anybody, because it's the right to say things that are disgusting, and it's the right to say things that are offensive, and it's the right to say things that, it's the right to deny the Holocaust. It's the right to lambaste, murdered children. That's what free speech is. It's a disgusting right. And the problem with it is that it's both a disgusting right and it's a necessary right. And that's what you find. I think that hand in hand, you find that like necessary rights, things that we as human beings are sort of inborn with, these proclivities to do things like speak freely, are the essence of our ability to move society forward, right? You have to be able to, like, Holocaust denial is disgusting. I think it's bad. How do you change someone's mind if you don't know that they're a Holocaust denier?
Mm-hmm.
How does someone
would never be able to know that they are?
So you live like, I am of the belief that if you get rid of something like free speech, what you do is you pacify society, and you live in a world where nobody actually tells you what they think. And not only that, it becomes so onerous to have your own thoughts that what you end up doing is you end up with a populace that ends up deciding that they will just go along with the status quo. And what happens is, as people go along with the status quo, you end up with something far more evil than something like Holocaust denial. And that's how you get gulags. That's how you get throwing people in prison for disagreeing with the status quo. Because you have the status quo, what eventually happens with the status quo is that something crops up and begins to tilt the status quo toward evil. And evil looks a lot different to different people. For some, evil looks like telling mothers and daughters who lost their children that their children didn't die. To some, evil looks like not paying women as much as men on the job. To some, evil looks like something very, extremely innocuous, perhaps like a joke that like Joe Rogan will tell or something like that. And some of those things I consider to be evil. But when you have this sort of sliding scale of evil, you have this effect that, like, you see, if people tilt towards what is status quo, you're going to have sort of this closing of the Overton window. You'll have this closing of what is socially acceptable, unless you're allowed to be as fucking ridiculous as you want to be. Allowed to. It doesn't mean it's socially acceptable or socially good to be that ridiculous. And what we have with freedom of speech is socially enforced law, right? We have people who are basically not speech police, but like society sort of polices speech, right? We have speech that we don't like, and we as a society think is bad. And we have speech that we think is okay. But if you want to venture into that bad speech place, you can. And that's wonderful. And the thing is this, that the reason that you need the Second Amendment is because as in the event that you get rid of the First, you have no ability, in the event that you get rid of the Second, you have no ability to prevent the First from collapsing.
But okay, yeah.
That's my opinion. I think there's a lot of people who will just vomit when they hear that. But I think that it's obvious. The First wants to collapse because it's a disgusting, terrible, awful truth that we should have freedom of speech. The Second is necessary because the First is disgusting.
Okay, yeah. So what do you think about Bitcoin.com sponsoring the defense of Mr. Wilson?
Wait, say it again. What do I think of what?
Bitcoin.com has said that they will pledge any amount that someone gives to his legal defense fund, they'll match.
Well, I think that it's pretty clear that Cody's speech is disgusting to a lot of people. But I think that, per what I was saying, I think that it's necessary to allow him to speak. And I do think that printing things out on your printer and looking at things on your computer is speech. So I don't even know that I need to equivocate on what I think about his speech. I think that there's good speech and bad speech. Sure. I think that all speech must be allowed. I think the more breadth that you give people in terms of their ability to speak, the better off things are. Because then bad ideas can see the light of day. Good ideas have a chance to wash them away. I think that is the only way that you can sort of bleach society's eyes. The only way that you can get people to see the light, and what I would be so bold as to call redemption, the only way that you can have people redeem themselves from the woes and hells of bad ideas is through allowing those ideas to be spoken into space and to be contended with. And if you don't speak them into space, if you don't allow them to be spoken into space, you can't contend with them. So what happens is they live underneath social norms like an infection, waiting to cause a heart attack.
Mm-hmm. Now, does the internet have to be that space, or do you think it should be, or should they be allowed to censor that at all?
I mean,
like it's different. They have different rules for where you can say things. Like there's time, place, and manner restrictions. You can say anything you want in your home. There's never a time where that can be censored. But if you're, say, in a school, they can certainly censor certain levels of your speech there. Or if it's a school.
Well, in what way? What do you mean they could just censor certain levels of your speech?
So if you had ideas, there's a lot of different cases about what is or is not a public forum, and there's also like religion plays into it as well. But there's certain cases where if you're advertising, like say you have a school that opens its basement up for AA meetings at night or Christian church group meetings at night, and then a Satanist group wants to come in and have a meeting there. The school says, oh, well, we don't like Satanism, so, see you later. Well, they can't do that because they're allowing Christian meetings there. If they said no religion at all can happen here, then they can go ahead and say, then none can come.
That's the case.
Allow one.
That's the case with public schools.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's, I don't think that's a restriction on speech. I think that's in fact the correct way for that to be done. I think that like when you have a public entity advocating, like public entities are supposed to be neutral. You cannot advocate certain, mm-hmm. social norms.
They don't have to let that. They don't have to let everything in. Like to be, they don't have to let any religion come in. Like they can say a full restriction on this type of speech, which one religious speech, or even if it was. I can't really example other than religious speech.
Is that there are the Supreme Court and the courts generally have been very tight about regulating speech. They have defined very, very slim ways in which it can be regulated. And if you look at any of the court cases, even the like yelling fire in a crowded theater, all of these court cases, they have attempted their darndest to decide them on absolutely razor thin terms, right? They try to say that, like, I don't know, for example, speech that creates an imminent threat is speech that is not allowed. So if I say I'm going to go blow X up tomorrow, maybe that's, or today, that's an imminent threat.
It has to be right now.
I think that would be imminent. I think if I said I will do it later, then that speech is allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that the right to free speech, I think that it is zealously guarded by the courts, right? I think that it is a scary world in which we live when people are thinking and believing and strongly pushing for the status quo, for any kind of speech to be wholesale restricted, and to tell people like Cody Wilson that he can't print plans. What do you think happens when you tell people there's a whole bunch of speech they're not allowed to look at? What happens?
Well, people they find a way to look at it. Yeah, it's the they want to see it even more. Actually,
the question, like, I've heard this from a number of people regarding the Alex Jones ban. For example, I heard someone say the other day, "I never believed in 9/11, but now that Alex Jones has been taken off the air, I'm inclined to believe it." And I don't know. I'm guessing that person was joking, but you know what? That's what happens. I actually think there's probably a lot of people who used to think Alex Jones was a crazy nut.
And then now that he's off, it gives it legitimacy to what.
Well, not just that. One of the conspiracies that he touted was that that YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter were trying to ban him, which was the kind of thing that people used to say were crazy. They would say, "That's nuts. They're not targeting you." What did they do? All on the same day. They targeted him. They removed him from their platforms. It's a confirmation of a conspiracy that he had been touting for months. What do you think that does to people who were on the fringes listening to him, who thought he's nuts, but maybe he's onto something? I don't know. I'm just going to watch and see. What do you think it does to them? It makes them Alex Jones religionists, because now they're going to seek out his content because it's banned content. It's no longer something you're allowed to listen to. People are willing to die to listen to banned content. It doesn't matter how insipid or innocuous the content seems.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think will happen? Like, do you think they'll allow that because we value speech so much in America, the 3D printing will be allowed to continue?
I think that I am scared of the fact that speech is going away. I am a person who personally is very scared of the idea of free speech restrictions and free speech sort of disappearing. And there's a lot of reasons why. One of which is that speech nowadays is persistent. Okay. So if there are words you're not allowed to say, but they're not allowed to be said in 10 years, what do you do about the fact that I said those words 10, 15, 20 years ago? And what do you do about the fact that my content is on the internet and I'm shown saying those words? What do you do? Because that's a weird world in which we're going to have to contend with all sorts of strange, nuanced problems. Do you hide that old content? Do you disappear it?
Well, if you look at textbooks, that is what they do. They hide it and reprint it and take it away. Like
that's not a deletion of the old book. We don't have a book burning to like say goodbye to the old books.
They just get taken out of circulation though. So unless you owned it,
books get updated. Like that's the thing. Like you can update it if there's a social a shift in social understanding or like a change in sort of the social milieu. Then yes, you update things to sort of conform, because you know what, it's a little bit difficult to teach from a textbook that is written about how dinosaurs might be on Venus when we know that they're not. Right? Like things change, knowledge changes, the world changes. Fine, maybe we call a vagina a front hole instead of a vagina. Maybe that's what textbooks need to do now. I don't know. The goal is to convey information, and as long as the information being conveyed is true, I'm okay with that. But what I wouldn't be okay with is like a book burning for the old content, where we where we grieve at how disgusting and racist the old authors were. Right? I look at stuff like Joseph Conrad, who writes Heart of Darkness. And he writes it, 100 years ago. And he writes what amounted to a fairly amazingly progressive book for the time, where he basically outlines how the Congolese people are being oppressed by these sort of Dutch conquerors and these Dutch emperors, right? And at the same time, Joseph Conrad himself is a bit of a racist by today's standards. Everybody was. And it's difficult in a world when you start judging people by today's standards rather than understanding the context they lived in. And that's, like, to me, I look at something like that and I'm deeply scared of what's going to happen, because the context I lived in 2 years ago was so different than the context I live in today. And I don't know what you do when the world shifts in such a strong, incredible way. I don't know how you live in the world where 2-year-old you is going to be a racist, bigoted homophobe. I don't know what you do when you live in a world where nobody is allowed to be redeemed. It's a bad world. So I'm scared of it. So what do I think is going to happen to Cody Wilson? The answer is I have no fucking clue. What should happen to Cody is he should be allowed to distribute and print his gun instructions. Is that good? Is it bad? I don't know. As a society, we contend with those things that are good and bad. I don't think that we can know whether it's good or bad. I don't think Cody himself knows whether it's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a society, we get together and we contend with things as they come. And we have cultural conversations about whether it's good or bad. And we teach our kids what's good and bad. We don't tell people before we know what's going to happen, whether what they're going to do is terrible. And you know what? What's even more frustrating to deal with as humans is that sometimes terrible things are better.
Like the 3D guns? Or what kind of terrible things are better?
Like free speech. Free speech is a terrible goddamn right. Awful. Mm-hmm. Nobody should have it because humans are stupid. Every single human is so dumb. No one should be able to say the shit that's on their mind. But what we found as a result of being able to say the shit that's on our mind is that it allows us to contend with the world we live in. You are able to say things that make no sense. And you're allowed to then have someone come to you and you have a dialectic with them and you decide what's more true than the thing you believe. And you can't do that without free speech. And that's scary to me. That's why the United States has done so well the last 250 years. It's because we are able to contend with the shit. It's why we stopped having children work in factories. We could contend with the evils of that. Mm-hmm. It's why it's so difficult for us in the United States to understand why countries out there who don't have the same freedom and ability to contend with problems because they don't have the ability to speak into the universe, the issues at hand, both the stupid and the good ideas. They don't have that same freedom. So we can't understand how it is that, I don't know, in places like, Uganda, there's a guy going around and doing, sermons about how gay people put it in the, they want to put it in the poo-poo, and they want to teach children how to do that. You cannot contend with that speech because you know what? In those countries, you have this cultural milieu that's shifting in one direction or another that's highly problematic. And in that case, I think a lot of conservative Christians would love the fact that they're putting that there are these, I believe it's Ugandans who want to put gay people in prison forever, for a very long time. Some of them want them even dead. A lot of conservative Christians think that would be a good idea, but in America, you can have that terrible, disgusting thought. You can have that terrible, disgusting belief wrapped into your ideology, and I can disagree with you. And we can live in the same apartment. We can be in the same planes. We can drive the same cars. We can sit at the same restaurants. And I can disagree with you wherever the fuck I want. And you don't have any fear of the Gestapo coming through the doors and taking you home and disappearing you because of the opinion that you have. You are allowed to believe that the Holocaust didn't happen. And I am allowed to disagree. Mm-hmm. And to me, without that, you end up in a world that tilts towards evil. And you tilt there because people are afraid to express their opinion. Sermon done.
Well Amen. Said. Yeah, you would make a good sermon if you ever want to become a cult leader. You have just a way of expressing yourself. That's
well, if you want to join my cult, you can. It's in the Ethereum Plus Coin Dojo. It's on Telegram. Just Google it. Just Telegram it.
Are you caught up with? I'm sure the lot has happened since the last I read, but there was some very. Well, I guess it's a good place for free speech, but that someone, Weldy, I think is his name.
Yeah, the Weldy McWeldon whale guy.
Yeah, he was saying a lot of stuff about women, needing to know their place better. I don't usually take offense to anything in the.
You take offense to that?
No, I didn't really, because I think he was just kidding or trying to get a reaction out of it.
Do you know your place, Sasha?
I do kind of.
I never get too offended by gender conversations because they're stupid. If you want to again, the beauty of America is that you can succeed whoever you are. And if you believe that there's people standing in front of you and preventing you from succeeding, then there are.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And if you believe that there aren't people standing in front of you and your success, then there aren't. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of that is if you believe that there aren't people standing in front of you and your success, you can still fail. Doesn't matter. Everyone can fail, and you can blame yourself. You can blame others. You can blame anyone you want. Don't care. It's still up to you. I firmly believe that it's up to you. It's a wonderful world. You can become a rich entrepreneur like Elon Musk, or you cannot.
Mm-hmm.
You can become anything else. And in your case, you're a shitty podcaster. So that's what you've become. And then maybe that's all you'll ever be. And that's fine. Just kidding. I'm a shitty we're all shitty podcasters. That's what's beautiful about this place.
Some are shittier than others.
You're pretty good. I think you're doing a very good job. You've presented a great platform for me to take over and say anything I want to. So you've gone from shitty podcast to shittier podcast today. Congratulations, Sasha.
Thank you.
Sasha, where can people find you? Thanks for coming to Junseth's World.
Oh, just on Twitter at Sasha Hodler. That's pretty much it. What about you? You said the dojo.
I'm Junseth on Twitter, and you can find me in the Ethereum Plus Coin Dojo along with Camboy Sean, who is a fixer on my show, and Dante. If you're a listener to the show, you'll know Dante and Sean. Dante right now is on hiatus. He's in prison in England right now after trying to free Tommy Robinson, which I recommended against, but he did it anyways.
Dante's in the Quarantine Clan in the Bitcoins game. So
is he?
Mm-hmm. But he hasn't been very active since he's the last few months.
Because you can't get into the Telegram group when you're in prison.
Mm-hmm.
He's there. I'm sure he's participating in some kind of corn game while in prison, though. I think they call it cornholing.
I think he's going to come on my show too sometime, he said.
Maybe when he's out.
Yeah.
All right. Is that it? Do you have anything else? Anything else you wanted me to rant about? I can rant about anything.
I was going to ask you all about what the government should do in terms of regulating Bitcoin in America, but
that's a good question.
Pretty big question.
Yeah, I don't think that we. I mean, I think you're the lawyer. You're the one that needs to work that out. I don't know shit about regulations.
It's like I started off in learning about Bitcoin thinking that it shouldn't be regulated at all. And this was, a way to get away from regulation. And that was kind of the main thing that people liked about Bitcoin. And then, the Bitcoin, it's still not the Bitcoin. It's still not super regulated. It's the other applications of it, like selling it through an ICO, the SEC can attach. I guess the government can regulate Bitcoin in terms of, taxing it, like that's something that's pretty blanket on there, but and then the money transmission side of things, which, as you said, so when I first was looking at it, I was thinking, this is stupid, they shouldn't be touching it. But what you said right at the beginning of the podcast about maybe we shouldn't be sending it to Somalia because maybe it could be used for terrorism there, like that it is true that there are reasons that some of these regulations are in place, but it seems like since 2001 with the Bank Secrecy Act, the government kind of maybe went overboard with it. So what I think could be a good way to do it is based on the size of the transaction. So instead of making everyone blanketly comply with this Bank Secrecy Act and the money transmission laws that go around it, maybe have a tiered system. So if your transaction's under $500, it can stay private. And as it goes up in size, then you have to do more and more to comply with the regulation. But then on the contrary to that, someone could just do a ton of $500 transactions and have the same results.
So I hear a lot of interesting things there. And number one, like this is the question I ask all Bitcoiners when they talk about Bitcoin regulation. I mean, it sounds to me like you believe that there's a bunch of regulation that already applies to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So is Bitcoin unregulated?
No.
Okay.
Not in America.
It's not unregulated anywhere. Like you can, in any country, you have something of value stolen, you can sue. The courts themselves provide a base layer of regulation. Like the idea that this is an unregulated currency or a unregulated commodity or whatever it is just false. Everything is regulated. Your fucking toys that you buy for your children are regulated. So like, Bitcoin's regulated, everything's regulated, and that's fine. Like, I don't know what we need more than traditional financial regulations. I think what we need to do is find out which buckets Bitcoin fits into, because there's a lot of categorizations out there for financial products. I think we got to find out which buckets Bitcoin actually fits into. And the thing is, it
morphs between a lot of them. Bitcoin itself, I think, can be treated like a commodity, but all of these other things, it depends how it's sold. Right now, anyway, the way I understand it is, if it's sold by an ICO, it can easily fall into the security side, and if it's something like anything where you're giving someone an expectation of value based on someone else's work, is going to be something that the SEC can regulate.
Sure, that was actually going to be my next thing. Is I think that like a lot of times people in Bitcoin will complain that like one government agency says it's this thing, and then another government agency says it's this other thing. But the reality is that like Bitcoin is a chameleon of sorts, right? Mm-hmm. It acts like currency when it's used in transactions. It acts like a commodity when you're holding it like gold. It acts like a stock or a security when you're using it to ICO your company. Like it acts in different ways. It's an amorphous sort of conglomerate of things. And what's beautiful about those things is that each of those things have been developed independently. What would have happened in a world where we didn't have stocks like we do? And that's a recent development that was developed in the 17th century. We have stocks in a world where we wouldn't have paper money like we do, which is a recent development. That was the Mississippi Company, paper money, essentially its first iteration or one of its first iterations in the modern era. If we didn't have an understanding of commodities in the United States, and that's a recent sort of regulatory leap as well. If you look at sort of the history of those, the FCC, and that's a very, you look at the development of things like the modern day clearinghouses, which is automated clearinghousing and whatnot, is a very, very modern invention as well. The Chicago Commodities Exchange, which revolutionized the way that we do commodities, had a clearinghouse in Minneapolis, but many years after it was founded, only because they realized that they needed one, right? So there's an awful lot of history here that's baked into categorization of financial commodities. And what you have with Bitcoin is you have this weird amalgamation of what looks like every single one of those types of things, and we have to figure out which buckets Bitcoin falls into and when. And that's the difficulty here. It's not that we don't have regulation about Bitcoin. It's that we don't know which regulations to apply when. Because I can get a guy to stand up in court and say that Bitcoin isn't money, but I can also get a guy to stand up and say it's not a commodity. And I can get another guy to stand up and say that it is not a security. And it is sometimes all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Depends how you're using it, I guess. Yeah, and all the time.
Right.
And regulation is kind of a reactionary thing. Like it'll come in place when they feel like they need to protect against.
Right. Well, what we'll find out is that there are holes in our law due to Bitcoin. and we'll plug those goddamn holes like a person plugging a hole in a dam. And you know, we'll do our darndest to fix them. But like in the meantime, we have to be reasonable about this and just realize that like Bitcoin is all of the things that the government says it is. That's both the weird reality and the truth. Like I guess those are the same thing. Both weird realities and truths are similar. But yeah, like I think that's something we're going to have to contend with socially, which again requires that we have the ability to speak into the air what is true about Bitcoin and what is false about Bitcoin. And that for me in the early days, again, was very frustrating because like you would talk about Bitcoin and you weren't allowed to mention the drugs that were being bought with Bitcoin. People would be like, shh, quiet. We don't want people to know about that. But like that was the truth of it. Why was it being used for those things was a really interesting question. Why isn't it being used in transactions for coffee? These are the things that Bitcoin needs to contend with, that we as people need to contend with. What makes Bitcoin better or worse than fiat? What makes fiat better or worse than Bitcoin? And
well, on the coffee question, there's a really obvious reason. Well, one, that the coffee shops aren't accepting Bitcoin, a lot of them, but also because you're going to have to, if you want to be a good, you know, tax person, you have to calculate your capital gain every time you do the tax. And they put that tax fairness thing, like any other currency, you have a de minimis amount. I think it's $800. If you're transacting under that, you don't have to worry about tax. But with Bitcoin, there's, you know, if it's not a currency, it doesn't have that tax treatment. So that's kind of a disadvantage that we have.
So that's interesting and true. And maybe that means that we need to change some laws. Or maybe we want it to remain in this sort of commodity world in terms of like understanding with the IRS. Maybe what you want to do is you want to have a currency that you always exchange for fiat before you buy coffee. Maybe. I don't know.
We'll be able to watch and find out over the next couple of years.
That's what I think is going to be really fun, is that we get to see how this works out.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Happy Pepeing to you.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha.
All right. Bye.